Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Pop Culture Double Date. This week we're here to discuss Westworld, Season 2, Episode 8. And tonight we're joined by Anaja, Gerald, Maggie, and Darren. This is a full spoilers episode, so you've been warned. So let's just get into it. So I think we should start today's podcast by just going around the table and getting everyone's impressions on this episode. I thought this was quite an important episode from a sort of plot perspective. But yeah, like, what did everybody think? Anja?
Yeah, so I think there were some important plot developments in this episode, but I also really loved this episode just for the story that it told. So, you know, for me, it was just this beautiful story of this idea that is it how do I say his name? Is it Akecheta? Am I saying that right?
Akecheta?
Oh no, I can't even say his name right.
Okay,
yeah, that's how they call him. So Ake, who, you know, even though they've wiped his memories, there are just some memories that are connected to emotions so strong that they resurface, and specifically, sort of memories of loved ones. Same for other members of his tribe. Like you can't really wipe all of those memories out. And I just love the story of this man who notices that something just isn't right and then fights to try to understand what it is. And he comes to this realization that he is living in the wrong world, or a world that he doesn't choose. He's living a life that he doesn't choose, and he wants to strive to lead everybody to something better. I thought it was a really beautiful story of a man who searches the whole world for the person that he loves, and once he's done searching the world, he searches the underworld for her. And even more beautifully, when he finds her and he realizes that she is lost to him forever, he grieves that, but he can also put it into perspective, and he looks around him and he sees, you know, all those other bodies, and they represent the loved ones that all the other people in the world above him have lost. And he sees that, and it doesn't turn into hatred. He doesn't turn to vengeance. He doesn't become cold and bitter. He really just strives to protect the people that he cares about from this fate, and to try to lead them to something better. So I thought that it was a really beautiful story. And yeah, from the plot perspective, we found out something quite important about what the Valley Beyond might be. There's a literal door there. And I also just thought it was great that they interweaved this episode over 30 years of Westworld history. And I think for them to achieve all of that and tell a story as big as that story without it being cheesy, or without us just losing interest because they didn't connect enough, was amazing. So I really liked this episode. Mags?
I absolutely loved this episode. It was my favourite of the season so far. I thought the lead actor, Zane McCorman or something, I can't remember his name, was amazing. He really carried the episode. I thought it was lyrical and elegant, and it went back to the whole reason why, you know, I love Westworld in the first place, which is a sort of musing about humanity and about what the essential sort of ingredients of a life worth living, and a life that has been well lived is made up of. Are you guys still there? Hello?
Yes,
Yeah,
we are.
Oh, okay,
we
sorry.
are.
I can't tell if it's cut out or not. I thought the sort of relationship between him and his love, Kohane, was incredibly beautiful and well thought through. It's very, very thoughtful, I guess, relationship they put together. And the idea of calling, you know, the hosts that replace the characters that they're meant to play as ghosts, I thought was very clever. That, you know, in the memory of that the true person is the one that lives in the memory of the person they had the relationship with, not the sort of story itself. So it's this idea that memory sort of transcends story and transcends the I guess the purpose of the park for the hosts themselves. Some inconsistencies within the story, but for me, it didn't overwhelm how much I enjoyed it.
Cool. Jerry?
This to me was a very strong standalone episode of the show. Zahn McClellan, whom we last saw as Hansi in Fargo season 2, brought a great deal of depth to the role. I think he was many-layered. At once he was menacing on the outside, but on the inside gave a deeply tender performance of a man searching for a woman whom at first he only vaguely remembers loving, but becomes a stronger memory. And the linking up with Maeve, I thought, was extremely well done. That was a particularly nice touch at the end of the episode when we find out that Akecheta has been speaking to Maeve for most, if not all, of the episode. I still think, though, that as great as this episode was, it probably exposes some of the structural issues with this particular season of Westworld. I'm starting to doubt whether, in the planning stages of the show, or at least this season, the writers' room had enough story for the entirety of the season, and so we're getting these bottle episodes, which are great. They're great bottle episodes, but in terms of driving the story forwards, it didn't take matters very far. I think it was a great standalone episode, which, you know, hit the pause button on the main story and allowed us to explore some of the lesser known figures in the Westworld universe more. And I'm quite happy for the show to have done that. But I think in terms of the main story, there may not have been enough to sustain the entirety of the season. The preview for next episode looks like it's going to be mostly a Man in Black Bottle episode. So it seems like they're very elegantly delaying the denouement of the season and playing for time. But all that notwithstanding, I thought this was a very, very strong episode.
Yeah. Look, I would say that while I agree that it feels like a bottle episode, I thought, look, I was very happy with this episode as well. And I actually thought it was important from a Westworld perspective because it kind of goes back to that sort of, you know, we've had a few detours that haven't really been like that sort of Westworld sort of sci-fi discussion of consciousness types of episodes, right? And I kind of feel like this episode has gone back to kind of those season 1 roots where it is a touching story about a man looking for his love, but at the same time, it's also like throughout it, there's like all this commentary on consciousness and the importance of memory, how important memory is as a cornerstone of one's consciousness. I also felt like there were strong sort of religious themes, and it's something that I actually want to discuss later because something that I really loved about this episode is that it kind of gives you an understanding of how religions can be formed or mythologies and legends can be formed. And I thought that from a plot perspective, it was also a really important episode because I think the episode explains exactly why hosts are being awakened, right? Like what the process is, right? Because I know a few episodes ago we were talking about how it seems completely arbitrary how hosts are waking up, and I think this episode kind of explains exactly like what the process is that kind of makes the host kind of aware and sort of capable of retaining or accessing their previous memories, right? Having said that, I personally felt that it was both a beautiful episode and a frustrating episode because I thought it was like, you know, like the core thrust of the episode was really, really well made. But again, I found myself being taken out of the immersion, basically by the stuff that the Delos Corporation were doing. Like, it was just there was
Yeah.
one scene in particular that just it just boggled my
You mean
mind.
you mean where he walks around?
Yes,
Walks around Mesa?
yes,
because
yes,
because last season when Maeve was trying to move from one part of the Mesa to the other, it was actually very difficult. There were people everywhere, and she had to devise a plan that would allow her to sort of get Felix to get her through without being noticed. Whereas for some reason, the whole place is cleared out very conveniently for Akecheta to just wander through, go down the elevator, and into the storage room.
yeah. It was like, I mean, for me, it was just like, what is actually going on with Delos? Like, there's this, like, it actively made me, like, I mean, we've joked about how much of a broken down organization Delos is, but it actively took me out of immersion. It sort of made me question the logic of the world a little bit. It was just really it was just a really weird scene. In particular, like, when they find out that he's been running around for a decade without being brought in for servicing, their reaction is basically, who cares? It's it's just I just didn't understand. I completely didn't understand what was going on there. It yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but
The other thing is, he's also been off loop for almost a decade, and no one's taken. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we know from season one that they're actually quite sensitive to monitoring
off loop,
departures from the
exactly,
narratives of every single host,
exactly.
and Akecheta has been off loop for almost a decade,
And no
and
one notices, and
there's a
it's just
shrug of the shoulders.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's completely implausible that they wouldn't have known about it. It's implausible that their policy would be that we don't upgrade the hosts until they die, because there are several hosts in several narratives who are unlikely to die because they're not in combat type roles, or they're in safer parts of the narrative. So a lot of that stuff didn't make sense. I think the reason why she said just put him back in the field was because she was trying to cover her ass a little bit. But I think the show is asking us to just ignore this stuff, which is a little bit much, to be honest. Like,
But
but Darren, can
yeah,
I ask why you think this episode explains why the hosts are being wakened? Because I'm still not completely sure I understand. Like, is it just because the memories are so strong that they can't be overridden and they keep resurfacing, or does it have to do with the symbol of the maze that seems to trigger a great awakening? How do you think it
yeah.
explains that?
So I think that it kind of links to season one, right? And this is why I like this episode, because it harkens back to, like, the whole Arnold thing, right? Basically, throughout season one, we're made aware that the hosts absolutely have the processing power and the consciousness, basically, to be termed as conscious, but they're not functioning like, I guess, living beings in a way, because they have no access to their memory, right? And so you're introduced to this idea, like, there's a bicameral man and, like, all these, like, layers of consciousness. And I guess we're introduced to this idea that memory is a core pillar of consciousness, right? Like, you can't be conscious if you don't have access to your true memories, right? So that's set up. And I think what this episode, for me anyway, the way I interpreted it, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but the way I interpret it is that when Akecheta walks into the town where Arnold's been shot, there's the little, like, picture of the bicameral, of the, not the bicameral man, of the maze, right? That's sitting on that table. And when he sees that for whatever reason, Arnold has programmed this little thing in their minds that when they see that symbol, it creates a memory peg, right? So from the moment they see that symbol, they will be able to access their memories to that point, right? So around that point is when they have access to their memories. Prior to that point, they can't really hit it, right? And I think you see that numerous times, right? Because, like, what he does, and the reason why Ghost Nation is able to understand what is actually going on, is because after he sees the symbol, he starts going a little bit nuts, right? And he starts inscribing the symbol everywhere. And you think he's going crazy, but him inscribing the symbol everywhere means that everyone else in Ghost Nation subconsciously sees the symbol. They're like, the guy looks at him and goes like, looks at the girlfriend and says, your husband's going crazy. He's inscribing this symbol everywhere, right? And then you notice that his girlfriend and that guy both have seen that symbol. Subsequently, that guy that gets taken offline because he's malfunctioning, and the girlfriend is able to access her memories of him because she has that memory peg that's been put down in place at that point in time. Similarly, also the Ghost Nation mother, the sort of matriarchal figure, the matriarch figure there, she's seen that symbol as well, right? So Maeve's daughter, so it makes sense, right? Because all of these interactions that he's had with people that have awakened, are because, so basically my hypothesis, and I think that this was what the episode was trying to get at, is that the moment you see that symbol, you have a memory peg, and as a result, you have consciousness, right? Because your mind is pegged back to the moment that you see that symbol. So Maeve's daughter, even if you can't actively access those memories until someone triggers it in you, you actually have the ability to access those memories to that point, which is why Maeve's daughter, the moment he starts talking to her, she can start sort of flashing back to when she saw the symbol. And then there's the scene where Maeve gets given the little stone that Akecheta has inscribed in blood with the symbol, and I think that's the moment that Maeve kind of awakens a little bit, right? Because she is able to access memories back to that point in time. That's why her daughter is so important to her, because she's able to access memories to that point in time, right? And she's able to remember that set of human interactions, right? So, I think so.
Well,
That's kind of.
Akecheta can actually access memories prior to when he saw that symbol, because we start the story at a time prior to that. So I'm not sure that's the moment that they can. I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if that were true, then the first of their memories would start from when they saw that symbol. And for Akecheta, his memories start before that.
Yeah, but I think it's like, my interpretation was that it's not as it's not as hard as that, right? It's kind of like,
Okay.
it's like
It triggers it, and then after that, you've got all your memories.
well, not necessarily all of them, but it's kind of like a peg around which you start having conscious memory, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I strongly got that sense from the show, and that's why for me this episode was so satisfying from a plot perspective, because I felt like they had kind of explained what was going on with the kind of awakening of the hosts, right? It's interesting though that you guys didn't read that the same way that I did. So
I read that as just, okay, this is a symbol, and yes, maybe Arnold has programmed something in them to allow them to start accessing their memories once they see the symbol, because I don't know what else it could be other than that, but I preferred the idea that their memories were just not something that you can erase and overwrite, and that at some point those memories will resurface. Because to me that's sort of similar to, like, say, Alzheimer's, where even when the disease starts to erode the memory and cover up the memory, those memories still resurface sometimes, because I don't know, that's the nature of memories, particularly strong ones. So that's kind of how I read their coming to consciousness. It started with the memories, and then it sort of led to a deeper awareness of the nature of their reality.
I think regardless, the symbol, whether the symbol is a peg in time or whether it allows them to access all of their memories, the symbols are linked to this idea of memory being linked to active consciousness, right? So, yes, look, agreed. I think in terms of the actual mechanics, maybe it's not 100% explained, but basically we do know that you look at the symbol and you can get access to your memories in some capacity, right? So, and then you have this idea that memory is important for your consciousness, I guess. So for me, I felt that at least was satisfying.
There are 2 points that I wish to make. The first is that, as I recall it in the pilot episode, we're told by one of the techies, I think it might even be Elsie, that the memories of each host aren't completely overridden, even when they're wiped for the purpose of being reinserted into their narrative or inserted into a new narrative. And as I recall it, also, this is the second point, one of the hosts goes berserk either in the pilot or the second episode in a bar, and he shoots up everyone who had killed him in his previous narrative. And it's never established in the pilot episode or subsequently that this particular host ever saw the maze symbol. So I don't think there's much of a correlation, or even I don't think there's a direct correlation, and perhaps there's no correlation at all between having seen the maze symbol and being able to access one's memories pre-narrative or in another life. So it may well be that the maze, while significant for Dolores and perhaps significant for Akecheta as well, it's not a touchstone of universal application for every one of the hosts.
Okay. Well, look. I think it's interesting that we've had, I guess, sort of different readings of kind of what that maze symbol represents. I guess it'll be quite interesting to see whether they explain it in more detail in the coming episodes. Was there anything else we wanted to say about the maze symbol?
No, I hope they do tell us a little bit more about it, but I doubt they will. I feel like this was their way of kind of wrapping that up, and because this episode explained why the Man in Black saw a physical maze around Maeve at that moment that so I feel like they're wrapping this up, and that's all they're going to say about it. But it would be good if we hear any more. And I think, Darren, like, your explanation of it is a really sort of well-rounded explanation, and it makes a lot of sense. I just didn't get that from, like, I don't know, I didn't get that from the episode, but if they had put it that way, it would be something that really made a lot of logical sense, but it wasn't clear to me that that's actually what was going on.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I think, let's move on from there.
You were talking about religious themes.
Yes. So this is something that I really loved about this episode, because I think, so Akecheta, in my mind, so there's kind of 2 points here, right? The first point is kind of like this week kind of reinforces that Judeo-Christian aspect of Westworld, and for me this week kind of solidified, you know how we talked about the religion remix and kind of who is playing which role, right? So based on my reading this week, like, Akecheta specifically refers to Arnold as the creator, right? And then he refers to Dolores as the Deathbringer. And I love that, right? Because he's kind of speaking like a fortune cookie, but it makes sense within his context, right? It's not like the Man in Black who actually has full knowledge of what's going on and speaks like a fortune cookie. Like, for Akecheta, he actually doesn't know what's going on, and he's just trying to sort of piece it together, right? So I guess the first point is kind of for me, it solidifies that Ford and Arnold are kind of like the Father and the Holy Ghost, right? You know, the Christian God has a Trinity. There's Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, right? So Ford and Arnold are the Father and the Holy Ghost. And then you have Bernard, who is the Son, right? Like the Jesus-style character, who's the son of kind of God, but also God as well. So they together form the Trinity, right? And then you have Dolores, who is kind of like the firstborn of the Creator, who is the one who wants to tear down his creation, right? So Dolores, in the sort of she is taking on the role from the Judeo-Christian myth of the devil, right? And this ties in with this idea of her being called the Deathbringer. So I thought there was that. And then you have Akecheta, who is basically Moses, right? Because his role is that he wants to lead his people to the promised land. His aim is basically to take all his people on this exodus, right, away from this false world. So I really love that, and I think linked to that is this idea that if you're going to be a Moses character, right, what are the things that kind of like define Moses as a character? And I think one of the things that defines Moses as a character is that he's a prophet, right? He has these sort of he has a direct relationship with God, right? He speaks to the creator, and Akecheta has multiple moments in this when he is sort of directly communing with the gods. And I really like that when he does that. Hey, are you guys still there, by the way?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah. I love the way that when he does that, the scenes in which he interacts with these people are like something that are like, it feels sort of mythological, right? It's kind of like, you have this idea of a burning bush and you're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you read these stories and you're like, this seems outrageous. There's no way that this could happen, right? And then he has that beautiful scene with Ford when he wanders into the clearing and everything is frozen, right? There's a bear, all his guys are sort of frozen attacking the bear, and then Ford is sitting there with spotlights in this area that just seems completely sort of shut off from the rest of the world, right? And he's sitting there slowly skinning the heads, like scalping all of Akecheta's men. And I just thought that was like, that is the sort of thing that that gets put in sort of religious imagery, right? And then it's kind of like in Westworld, it's kind of like it's both mundane and religious at the same time, right? You can understand how those sort of superstitions and sort of those dogmas build up if you get exposed to those situations without fully understanding what is kind of going on, right? And there's kind of multiple scenes in this episode where you're kind of like, actually, if you were him, if you put yourself in Akecheta's shoes, this would be a religious experience, right? This would be a completely otherworldly, supernatural experience. And if you put it down on paper, if you were in his shoes and you put it down on paper or you told people about it, they would think that you were crazy or that you were a prophet or some sort of... And then what's beautiful is that as viewers, we know exactly kind of what's going on. There's this rational explanation kind of, in inverted commas, for all of this stuff, right? So I love how it's able, like, this episode is able to kind of like, it's almost like it's kind of talking about how religions can kind of, the mythology of religions can kind of like start, right? Like, I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is a religious experience for him, because for him, Ford is his creator, or Arnold is his creator. Like, he refers to them that way, and that's also factual for them. That the humans are their gods in the sense that they created them and they have been controlling them. I really like your point about how if he went and explained this to somebody else, it would be as though he was losing his mind. And then the other side of it, where for us who know what's going on, it's not a spiritual experience at all.
Yeah.
Can I just ask how it is that Akecheta knew to identify Arnold as the creator?
Yeah, we don't know that.
We don't know that. Yeah.
It's another thing we're supposed to look the other way on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We don't know that. I actually really loved how he referred to Dolores as Deathbringer. I thought that was so like.
It's alliteration to it as well.
Yeah.
I can understand how he comes to see Dolores as a Deathbringer, because I think she's the only person in the entire tableau who's holding a pistol. So, although having said that, how does he even know what a pistol is, given that he's sort of, when we first meet Akecheta in his idyllic paradise life, that seems to be pre-Western settlement. So how he'd know what a pistol is, and the fact that Dolores holds a pistol and makes it the Deathbringer, is another mystery in the show, I think.
Yeah, look, I think it's kind of implied that their tribe does have interactions with the town. Like, I think that it's not like they're completely,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah,
Well, I was just going to say, I
Mags?
thought the cinematography was really beautiful this episode. They did all the beautiful lingering shots of the desert and of the different, mesas in the country, and I think that really added to the allegorical feel of the episode, that kind of vastness of the journey that he was facing, and as well as the sort of landscape in which they've built Westworld in. Yeah, I thought that was quite beautiful. The interaction with Logan, what do you guys think about that? Sort of threw that one in.
I guess plot-wise, it did show us, what happened to Logan when he rode off, and how it is that he sort of survived that experience. I kind of like Logan. You know how in stories there's the fool or the idiot, and this is the person who acts really silly, but they are supposed to have a kind of wisdom to them. So Logan kind of reminded me of that, in that he's kind of lost his mind and he's a bit of a fool, but he's sort of sprouting all these things that seem to have a real significance to them, like the idea that this is not the right world. And we're not quite sure what he means, but whatever that is, it's obviously significant.
yeah. So, like, to both of those points, Mags, I think that they're quite interesting. Like, firstly, I think them having all those wide shots of the landscape, I think it really added to the sense of scale of Akecheta's journey, right? So not only has he been on this journey for a long, long time, but like, you see him teleport from town to town, but when you see the scale of those vistas, you kind of get a inkling of, like, physically how long that journey must have been, right? Like, it's like he's had to travel across this entire thing time and again, right? So I think it adds depth and poignancy to, like, this this task that he's been undertaking. So yeah, I think they're both beautiful, and I think they really add to the story as well. Like, so I really like that. To Logan, can I just ask, like, do you guys think that it was? So are we meant to assume that that was basically where Logan had been left after William had dumped him? Is that right?
Yeah, he rode off and then fell off his horse at some point and was sitting under that tree for a long time.
I mean, does that seem plausible to you, right? Even given that he's supposed to be one of the key investors that they're trying to impress.
Does not seem plausible at all.
I was like, how could they possibly leave him out there to die of exposure like that?
I think the makers of Westworld are really relying on the fact that us diehard fans love this show so much that we will be okay with all of these other things that just don't make any sense at all, which is a bit crappy, to be honest.
I mean, based on everything we've seen about Westworld, you would expect it to get a really bad TripAdvisor review.
No, absolutely. Oh my god, the management is horrible. 0 out of 5 stars for the management.
Yeah, and the level of service for guests is just shithouse.
Yeah. I mean, the Delos. I was talking to Max that, like, basically what they do at the Delos Corporation is like worst practice, right? How could that you be running this multi-million-dollar organization with things that are carrying around active firearms and have that level of quality quality assurance, right? It's just I don't know. Anyway, anything that has to do with kind of the real world, like, the things that are inexplicable in this show are what the humans do, right? Like, all the human interactions are kind of like, is that really what a human would do? Because that seems kind of not right.
Yeah. So what did you think about Maeve? And it was really heartbreaking to see Maeve lying there with, like, her neck pretty much caved in. Yeah, and again, why are they ignoring the fact that she has these superhuman, super robot powers? Like, why don't they care? What's Charlotte Hale even doing there? Isn't she supposed to be on her journey to the Valley Beyond? From last episode, when Bernard told her that to head over there to Sweet, I don't even know what she's doing there. But what do we think is going to happen to Maeve? Is the posse going to turn up? Have they devised some kind of a rescue plan?
So, Anaja, can I just go back to that? So this was another bit that kind of took me out of it. Exactly what you just said, right? What is Charlotte Hale doing there? Like, I'm kind of assuming that this is before Carl Strand timeline, right? So, but the previous episode, she had just
It
been
can't be. Exactly. She was just checked in as they were all about to head off, right?
No, no,
No?
no, no, no. I think this is before Carl
No.
Strand.
This is before Carl Strand and after Dolores hits the Mesa.
Yeah, but
Uh,
she had just escaped from the Mesa. The last time we'd seen Charlotte Hale, she was like hightailing it out of the Mesa, and then all of a sudden
Yeah,
she's
because
just back here.
she's back in there. Yeah.
In basic,
Anyway.
and Sizemore was basically exactly where Dolores was. So it was kind of weird that, like, what was this engineer, like this ultra sassy engineer, doing? Like, wouldn't he have been killed? Didn't they just come through and
Yeah.
kill everybody?
Yeah.
Um, is it just me that felt weird again, right? Like, um, yes.
well, no, it was totally weird.
I don't mind looking the other way a few times, but I think that it's happening so much now that it does take you a little bit outside of the episode, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is really a function of the way the writers' room is working. The writers' room is so singularly directed towards setting up mysteries and dragging these mysteries out that basic bits of plotting are being ignored in the process. I've made the complaint before, and I'll make it again, that this show seems to be much more interested in setting up puzzles to frustrate or tease viewers than it is in actually telling a story, so a basic functioning story. And I think the fact that there are so many plot holes is symptomatic of that misplaced focus on the part of the writers' room.
Yeah, I think that's a little bit harsh, Jez, to be honest. Yeah.
It does quite well at... Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Max.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, do you reckon they've kind of confused themselves as well? And because every episode is pretty much a playback of, looking back over to a previous time, someone telling a story about a previous time or flashing back into the past, that they've kind of, maybe they've just literally confused themselves.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Look, I think they do a good job of telling the story, and that's why this episode was such a good one, because there was actually a lot of storytelling here. It's just there's a bunch of this other stuff sprinkled in that hasn't been thought out that well. It's almost like they don't care that it doesn't make sense. So I don't think the problem is that they're focused on the mystery. They're just not focused on these details and telling the story without leaving these gaping plot holes. But yeah. Like, another example is Man in Black, right? Emily comes in. Emily rides in out of the blue, asks for her father back, and Akecheta just sends him off.
Yeah. What? Yeah, exactly. Look, I agree with you 100%, Anaja. Like, my feeling is that they're not the Lost Riders, right? They're not setting up mysteries for the sake of mysteries, right? But I do feel that they kind of have their A team writing some of the plot, and basically the B team is kind of like, well, this isn't really that important. I just need to get him from point A to point B, so whatever, right? So, I think it's because how meticulously plotted out the main story is and how it works on so many different levels. It's such a stark contrast the way that the stuff in the Mesa is going, because it does feel like a different caliber of plotting, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, like, I guess from their perspective, they've made a call that, like, there's the main story and then there's the other stuff, and we're just going to focus on the main story.
What is the main story?
Well, I think
about sometimes, and I think that they're confused about that sometimes too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. That's true.
And Maeve's posse has been MIA for 2 episodes now.
Yeah. So let's get back to Anaja's point, which is what do we think is happening here? Do we actually think that Maeve is done for, or?
No.
No way.
Yeah. She's
Yeah.
the main character.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, bitches.
The posse has to save her because it's one thing to have a few gaping holes here and there, but to just write those people out and never to have them return doesn't. That really is lost territory. Walter kind of. Was it Walt's territory stuff that that I don't think will happen. So hopefully they are devising a plan. I don't know that any one of them is smart enough to actually come up with a rescue plan, but hopefully they manage it. Maybe Sizemore even gets in on that.
Well, like, okay, let's think about the posse that Maeve has left behind, right? It's Hector, Armistice, Felix, Sylvester, and the Japanese lady. None of whom are known for their brains, right? 3 muscle and 3 guy. Like, Felix and Sylvester are they're just along for the ride.
You know what? Muscle is all they need. If they can get Felix into the room with Maeve, he can help her. So maybe they just need some.
My other question is, what would Sylvester be doing in the posse? One would have expected Sylvester to have been in the crew with Sizemore that came in and snatched Maeve last episode, but he's not there. So Sylvester has just disappeared off the face of the earth. He's not a natural fit for the posse. He's a more natural fit for the gang that snatched Maeve, but he's not to be found anywhere. The main posse are missing, and there's a real problem because these are not people known for their ability to plan a meticulous operation. So we'll just see. But they have been MIA for 2 episodes now in circumstances where when we left them, they were in the middle of a gunfight with Ghost Nation.
Yes.
So one would have expected at the least some sort of explanation for where they were this episode, but no, it ain't there.
Yeah.
Another thing we should talk about is the door and the valley beyond and what looks like another place to store. Did we see stuff that looked like very similar to the cradle where they store things? I assume that's where the human consciousnesses or the human mind eggs are being stored. And then there's an actual door there. So what are we going to make of that door? The fact that Akecheta is talking about a world beyond there where they can somehow be free of the kind of loss that they have been experiencing in Westworld. They can be free to be with their loved ones. Is that idea realistic? Like, what kind of world would you ever be free to just be with your loved ones without loss coming in the way, and without that kind of sadness and death and all of that sort of intervening? Like, sure, you're not going to have your loved ones replaced by a complete different stranger, but you're still going to have the pain of losing people that you love in any world, unless you actually can live forever. So what is beyond that door? Even Ford seems to be teasing Akecheta with the notion that, there's some kind of heaven beyond that door. What is it going to be? I don't know what it can be other than the actual real world where humans generally live. But why that would be a type of heaven for the hosts, I don't know.
Look, I thought that basically he was trying to lead them out of the park, right? That the park was a false reality, so he was going to lead them out of the park. I mean, obviously, this may be a fool's quest as well, right? Because when they get to the Valley Beyond, like, I don't think it's a train out of there. And how are they going to integrate with the rest of the world? So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I did feel that this episode did also, like, it. I felt that Akecheta had come to an acceptance that his girlfriend was gone for good, right? Did you guys feel that as well? That, like,
yes.
he had. So I thought that was important because, again, it brings up this theme of death and how death is important for life, essentially, right? That, like, the consequence of death is actually an important part of living properly. Um, and I also,
Except he seems to think he can protect the others from that same thing happening. So I
yeah.
don't know that he's accepted that death is actually an important part for life. He's accepted that his girlfriend is gone, but I don't think he's accepted that for everybody else.
But I think, yeah, his aim is to lead them to a promised land where they'll be free of the false world, right? Or free of the imposed narrative loops. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I guess one of the things that struck me when I watched this episode was that, how he goes through that period when he actively tries not to die as so as to retain his memories. I thought that was quite powerful, right? Because for him, he was the one host who was kind of aware of his immortality almost, but he was actively fighting against it, right? And like, I thought it was a good juxtaposition with the Man in Black's view, which was kind of like, it doesn't actually matter. And then for this guy, it actually really, really matters because he's so afraid of kind of losing his memory. So I thought that was, anyway, that's a bit of a detour, but yeah, look, I have no idea what the Valley Beyond is. Like, I, I
It
genuinely,
can't just be a way out of Westworld, because let's not forget there's another way out of Westworld. It's the train. I know the train is gone, but there are train tracks, and there is another way out, right? The way
yeah,
that Maeve was going to go out before she decided not to. So it has to be more than just a way out. I imagine there's some plan involved that actually involves the human consciousnesses that might be stored in that valley. But yeah, I don't know what it is.
yeah,
Any thoughts, Gerald or Maggie?
Yeah, I'm inclined to think that it's more likely to be something related to the human consciousnesses, if only because it's William who built the Valley Beyond. I mean, he's the one who showed it to Dolores, I don't know, about 4 or 5 episodes back, being constructed. And it's still being constructed when Akecheta sees it in this episode, even though it's more developed and more advanced along the way. So it's got to do ultimately with William's original pitch, I think, to Delos, namely that this is a place where we can observe humans, their preferences, their deepest, darkest desires, and collect all that data and mine it to some other end, perhaps immortality, perhaps some other end. I don't know.
yeah.
Maybe the virtual world.
Yeah, maybe they are actually, I don't know, maybe it's the Matrix.
Because remember,
Yeah.
if Ford's quest is to live forever, and he no longer has a physical body, then it really is just the virtual world. And in that virtual world, if you've got real human souls that you control, wouldn't that make him feel all the more powerful?
Yeah, I guess we'll see if Westworld turns into the Matrix in the season finale.
It'd be really sad if it did.
Yeah. Well, I like the Matrix films, but it feels. We'll see what happens. What do we think?
How funny would it be if Westworld was a direct prequel?
Prequel to the Matrix.
No.
That would be amazing. I would love it.
I was reading somewhere as well that one of the reviews for this episode, that there's a lot of throwback to sort of Greek mythology in this episode, and the idea that there's a minotaur waiting in the valley beyond as the kind of guard to the entryway, and who that could be. So is it the Man in Black? Is that who Ford is calling to act as the Minotaur, so to speak, or is it someone else? Is it Charlotte Hale? Who is that? Is it
Or
Healy?
is it Dolores who wants to blow the whole thing up?
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of Greek mythology references. Who's the character that goes to the underworld in search of his wife, Orpheus?
Yeah. Orpheus and
Yeah.
Eurydice. Yeah. Yeah. Like definitely that scene of him going. Yeah, he actually goes in and sees. Yeah, it's. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. Well, obviously, with the Minotaur, also it's linked to the maze, the image of the maze, because obviously the Minotaur is
Oh
sitting in the center
yeah,
of the maze, right? So
yeah,
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Look, I mean, I think this is actually one of the great things that Westworld does, right? It's able to bring in all these sort of mythologies and religious imagery and
yeah,
kind of shove it in there, and kind of
yeah.
like as I said, it kind of makes you kind of understand where all like if you are at the birth of a religion or the birth of a mythology, this is how this sort of stuff actually gets put into place, and
Mm,
can still be explained. I think it's really clever what they've done there.
mm,
Like,
mm.
um, okay, what do we think about William and his ability to survive?
Oh my God. Oh, come on. As if he dragged himself, having at least 5 gunshot wounds, as if he dragged himself all the way to the river. I just don't understand.
Yeah.
I don't know why they're doing that. I think he's meant to be healed now, so Akecheta
How?
healed him.
How was he supposed to be healed? People take like months to recover from wounds, right? He's literally been there 10 minutes and he's been manhandled. It's not like Akecheta treated him like, really gently and tended to his wounds. He threw him on the ground and then was just like, there. And then all of a sudden, like by the end of his episode, William is up and walking again.
Mm.
I
So,
think
so
the
go
answer is that one of the people at the Ghost Nation camp was obviously Bruce Wayne's cellmate from The Dark Knight Rises, the one who cures his broken back in about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Also, look with that point, so at the end of season 1, the man in black breaks his arm, and his arm is in a sling when he goes to the party where the massacre happens. At the beginning of season 2, he has no sling and his arm is fine. It clearly hasn't been fixed, because if it was fixable, if that technology was there, he would have fixed it before he went to the party. He couldn't have found a second while he was hiding under all those dead bodies to fix his arm. So I don't know. That's clearly, it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Oh, this is what is so disappointing, because the show is so brilliant. Like the religious imagery that you sort of spelt out for us, Darren, that's incredible. The way they bring references in from so many sources of literature and poetry, and they create a truly interesting story with that. Truly amazing images, and things do make sense. And when you look back, there are things that they have sort of laid out from the very first episode to sort of plot this story out. They've done such a great job, and then they just sort of do this where, like, what? Like, did you not pay attention? Like, did you think we're not paying attention? You know that this audience pays more attention than any other audience of any other TV show. Like, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, the only explanation is that he has to be a host, right? Like, how else can you recover that quickly? Like, I mean, I would hate if he was a host. I actually would hate if he was a host. But it seems like it almost seems like it can't be unintentional that he's recovering from this stuff so fast. Given that like they're aware of people talking about this, like remember at the beginning of the season, people were trying to figure out which Bernard was which based on the scar on his
Yeah,
head, right? They're
yeah,
aware of this sort of stuff, right? So, like, they can't
yeah.
not be aware of what's going on with a man. It seems it would boggle my mind if they were aware of that level of detail and then just completely like oblivious to the fact that the man in black was recovering like a superhuman. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
We're going to get the answers next week, I think. It's a Man in Black episode next week.
Yeah. And I was discussing this with Manager the other day, and I floated the possibility that the hand in the bloody bathtub is actually that of William himself. He killed himself, and he was not lying when he talked about the way his wife died. Everyone's been suggesting, no, he's got the way his wife died wrong. She actually slit her own wrist in the bathtub. Maybe it's William who killed himself in the bathtub, and the William is seen now walking around Westworld, terrorizing guests and hosts alike, is a host himself.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess we'll see. It's yeah. At this point in time, I think to satisfy I guess the apparent incongruities, um, he would. I think he has to be a host. Anyway, we'll
Yeah,
see.
but
Yeah.
I like you. I think that would kind of suck because there are only too many. There are only so many times as showrunners you can pull the wool over viewers' eyes and say, "Aha, gotcha."
Yeah.
He was a host all along. I mean, they did it with Bernard in season 1, even though a lot of people saw that coming. They also pulled the trick off of making young William be the Man in Black, and then to have the Man in Black as we see him now turn out to be a host. I think you'd lose your audience's trust, and audiences would be well entitled to say, well, this is all just bullshit, and if you need an easy out, you can pull one out at any time. So I hope that he isn't a host, but everything points in that direction.
I would be okay with it because they have kind of dropped things along the way that you could see as real, like heavy hints that he is a host. I would be okay with it as long as they give us a truly like moving, gut-wrenching story of what happened to William and how he went from the man that he was to the robot the Man in Black was. If they can tell a really compelling story there, then I don't mind if he's human I mean, he's not going to be a host. He's going to be the same kind of thing that Jim Delos is, but one that actually functions, I guess.
Okay. So, is there anything else we want to discuss about this episode with Akecheta? Um, I think the general consensus was that it was a good episode, quite a moving, poignant episode. Um, yeah, and I'm really looking forward to next week. Is there anything else we
Yes.
want to talk about?
Just a musical shout out. When Akecheta is walking around the Mesa and goes underground to deep storage to find his wife, the music that's playing over the scene is a very, very beautiful piano rendition of Nirvana's Heart Shaped Box. And it continues a pattern of the showrunners using piano versions of 90s grunge songs from Soundgarden and other bands over, in addition to the score by Rami Javadi. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I did not know that, but thank you for that piece of trivia, Gerald.
Well, I can't wait for next week. I want to get a proper William episode. I want this mystery solved.
I hope you like William more after next week. I think this will be the test, right? If you come out of that episode, Anaja, you in particular, right? You come out of that episode and you feel like William is a viable character. I think that's the litmus test, right? Because if you come out of that and you still go, I hate William, he's a prick, kill him, right? Then
That's true.
yeah,
That's true. If they can change my mind, that will be one powerful episode.
yeah,
Well, I definitely think they'll be shooting for that. I mean, you don't cast an actor of the caliber of Ed Harris in a role and just get him to give a one-note performance. So hopefully this will be his aria of the series.
yeah. We'll see, and let's also keep a track of Delos. Like I want us to keep an active track of work, health, and safety practices that Delos employees are breaking every episode. Because this is a nightmare. The government needs to go in and regulate these guys.
Yeah, I mean, why don't the employees form a union?
Because they keep dying. They
They
don't
keep
have time.
dying. Yeah. No one.
How funny would it be if at the end of the series no one could get in and no one could get out of Westworld because disgruntled employees had formed a picket line outside the Mesa?
Are there any employees even left? There's like.
No, it's probably not.
Okay. Thanks everybody again for a fun episode, and we'll reconvene next week. Thanks everybody.
Yay! See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.